again, resilience. And that's probably what I've learned from my guests as a common theme is overall, we need to be resilient. We need to keep learning, keep moving. Conversation matters, sharing our life story with other people, and that maybe all of us could write a book.
Welcome to Friends in the Corner podcast, stories and topics from around Kentucky. I'm your host, Dan, coming to you from beautiful Lexington, and I want to be the first to welcome everybody in the fall. And we're going to be kicking the fall season off right with a special guest on today's episode. We're going to be talking with Tom Hailey of Bluegrass Region Voices and Views. Yeah, Tom started this podcast, Bluegrass Region Voices and Views, as an interview show where he interviews people with interesting and amazing stories from all around the Bluegrass state. Now, you might be thinking yourself, that sounds pretty familiar. Yeah, so we bring Tom on this show to talk about some of the similarities and differences of both of our shows. Tom even talks to us a little bit about how he first got started in podcasting all the way back in 2007. Yeah, Tom is one of the original podcasters of the Lexington area. Tom also talks to us about some of his most interesting guests he's had on the show so far and what he's learned from them, and he gives some really great advice to people that are wanting to get into podcasting. A really amazing interview, and I had such a great time talking to Tom. If you want to learn more about Tom and his show after today's episode, go check him out at bluegrassregionvoicesandviews.com. But I say, let's not keep the guests waiting any longer. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Hailey. Tom, how you doing today?
I am doing so well, Dan. I'm really excited about being on a podcast rather than hosting a podcast. And I'm more nervous being on a podcast than I am interviewing people. So this is different, that's for sure.
Well, hey, I'm excited to have you on too. And you've got quite the bit of history in podcasting we're going to be talking into today. Before we do that, tell my listeners a little about how me and Tom know each other. Me and Tom are both a part of a group here in town called the Lexington Podcasters. It's a nice social group that a bunch of local podcasters in the area meet at, and we share ideas and get connected and kind of just move away from our mics for a minute and just kind of meet people in person, which is awesome. And over the last year or so, talking to people in the group, I've told people about my show. They're very familiar with it, and they say, hey, you got to interview Tom Hailey because you guys' shows are very, very similar. And so I thought, hey, you know what? Finally, I got to meet Tom at a few of our first Zoom calls and then in person just a few weeks ago. And we finally made a time to sit down here and share our thoughts and ideas on podcasting, which I'm very excited for, Tom.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and it's really fascinating to see someone else's setup in their studio, and that was one of the things I was most excited about, was coming over and seeing how you do what you do so well.
How I ball on a budget.
as we all are.
But Tom, it's nice to have you on here, so we'll start with the hardest hitting question I can ask you. Who you are and where you're from?
Well, I am from Louisville, Kentucky. I was born and raised in Louisville. I came to Lexington in 1967 to attend UK, and I've been here in Lexington except for 1981 to 1985 when I moved to Pittsburgh. A company I was working for at the time transferred me there. Then in 85 I had the chance to come back to the Bluegrass, and I jumped on that chance and am so glad that I did, and I don't ever intend to leave here again. A lot of my friends in my age group are moving to Florida and doing things like that. Neither my wife nor I see that in our future at all. Our roots are here in the Bluegrass. This is where we're going to stay. I'm 72 years old. I spent my career in the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, and contracting.
Oh, wow.
Working for engineering companies part of the time, but the vast majority of it, well over 40 years, working for precast concrete companies, structural and architectural precast. So you asked me about myself. I might be telling you more than you wanted to know.
That's awesome.
So I retired at age 70 on October 1st, 2019, and I spent those last 5 years of my career doing continuing education programs for architect and engineering groups, either in their offices or at conferences, that type of thing. And I had no idea when I retired October 1st, 2019, how timely that was, because 6 months later, all of that was shut down. Everything pivoted to online and so on. So what I was doing wasn't being done anymore. But that's a little bit about me. So coming up in 3 weeks, I will have been fully retired for 2 years.
Well, congratulations on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, like you said, very timely, October, and then
Very.
a few months later.
That's right. I'd have been sitting at home anyway.
Well, and you mentioned you were out in Pittsburgh. So when you were out there, did you get converted into a Steelers fan at all?
I did not.
Thank goodness.
I did not. No.
Yeah, I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, so
Okay.
it's a whole another dark side for me. So
Yeah. I think I went to one Pirates game, I believe it was. That's their baseball team, right?
Yes.
I think if I remember right, it's been a while. I think I actually did go to a Pirates game, but never made it to a Steelers game.
I actually really like Pittsburgh, though. I went out there for a wedding a few years ago, and one of my favorite things was when you drive to the mountain and it pops out right on the yellow bridge.
Isn't that cool?
That was an awesome sight.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, we were fine with Pittsburgh. Never really thought about coming back home until one day I got a call from the employer that I had left here to go there, wanted to know what I would think about coming back home, and I had never thought about it until he said those words. And when he said that, it's like, yeah, that's what I want to do.
Hey, I'm for me personally, so I moved here for college at UK, started here in 2010, but honestly, after I graduated, people asked me, where do you want to go? Do you want to go home? Or I had potential opportunities to go out to California, and I was like, I like it here. I wanted to stay here. I dig Lexington. I dig Kentucky, and it just felt comfortable.
Yeah.
And now I'm married to a Kentucky girl, so I'm stuck here. So, yeah.
Where's your wife from?
She is from Franklin, Kentucky, just south of Bowling Green.
Okay.
So, yeah, she's a Southern girl, and she married a Yankee, so poor girl. So. Well, Tom, it's very cool to kind of hear your story, be involved in engineering, architecture realms, moving from Kentucky to Pittsburgh. You started in Louisville. Thank God you didn't pick up those colors while you were out there.
That's right.
You got the right ones. But I know that you've also had this journey into podcasting, which is what we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to be talking about your show, Bluegrass Regions, Voices, and Views. But even before this show started, you've been in podcasting for a while, because I remember us talking 2007 was the first time you launched your first show?
That's right. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think podcasting started around 2004, something like that. Is that about right?
That sounds about right. That echelon, yeah.
So in 2006, my wife and I were at a friend's home for a little party, and he was a techie type. He's a techie kind of guy, Dick Dickerson. And he mentioned something about how radio was going to be dead, that it was going to be replaced with online, on the internet. I don't think people even maybe said online back then. It was on the internet radio shows where anybody could record an audio file, convert it into an RSS feed, upload it. People could subscribe to it, and radio was going to be dead. Well, anyway, it may not seem like it to people when I'm around it, but I'm a good listener, and I pick up just about everything people say, and I store it away even if I don't use it right then. And I was just fascinated by that. I thought, man, because I could have a radio show. And the reason I had that thought was from the time I was a freshman at UK, my favorite activity has been, Dan, what you and I are doing right now, and that's having conversation, talking with people, hearing their stories. I was fascinated as a freshman in 1967 at UK with meeting people from other states that I knew nothing about and sitting over coffee and donuts at the K-Lair or a cheeseburger. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was interviewing them. Then later in my college career, I became the manager excuse me, became the manager of a pipe and tobacco shop at Fayette Mall called A. David Limited. So it was like an old English pipe shop, had a chessboard and everything. And guys would come in there and stand at that counter, and I'd be weighing out their tobacco and having these conversations with them. And so often I would, when they walked out, I'd think, oh man, I wish we could have recorded that conversation. Of course, that would have been on a cassette tape back then. Didn't have digital that I'm aware of. And I would think, man, that should have been on the radio, or that should have been recorded so their family and friends could have heard that conversation. So obviously the idea of podcasting really fascinated me, and my wife was aware of that. So she changed everything for me. One day I was sitting in my office at home, and she walked in with a newspaper article from the Lexington Herald Leader back then. I think it was the morning paper, which was the Herald, and it was this story about this college student, this young woman who was a graduate student at UK, and she was a dorm advisor, meaning that on her dorm floor she was kind of the go-to person for the freshmen and sophomores to ask questions about. And this woman had started a podcast, and her name was Coke, probably Koke or Koch or something like that. But she had a clever name for her podcast. She called it A Single Serving of Coke.
I love that.
And she would interview other students, other friends in her dorm room, put that on the internet, and I could sit home and listen to it. It was mind-blowing to me that was possible. So I started doing some research. I bought 5 books, which I still have, like the first 5 books ever written about podcasting. Wow. I've still got them. I studied those. I listened to Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting, which he still has and which I still listen to, and I decided to start a podcast. So I got out a legal pad and started. First thing I knew, I had to come up with a title. And I knew I wanted it to be an interview show because conversation is what I like. So I started writing down names of potential shows. And I must have written down 50, 60 different possible names, and finally hit upon Kentucky Voices and Views about interesting people, places, and activities around the state of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I did that for a while, a couple years. I took a break from it. I actually came back to it, did Kentucky Voices and Views again. Then I got all caught up in the world of public speaking and training and coaching. Friends of mine were involved with that. And so I started another podcast called The Breakout Session. Because, when you go to a meeting and you attend a session, it's called the breakout session. Yeah. So my idea for that, which is a great idea, and I still might come back to it, I still haven't canceled that show, but it was to have my guests be people who are teaching things, coaching, have written books on particular topics, and having these breakout sessions, on there. However, after a while, I realized that what I was really interested in, more than that niche of people teaching people things, was more arts and culture, authors, artists, all kinds of people. So I decided, and then I also decided that really Kentucky Voices and Views for me was a little bit too broad because, frankly, I should say the real enjoyment I get is doing what you and I are doing right now, and that's talking with someone in person, not over the computer with technology. My preference is to do it in person, and I knew darn well I'm not driving to Owensboro or Paducah to interview somebody, and I'm not going to ask them to come to Lexington. So I'm going to make this more niche. And is it niche or niche? I don't know.
I say niche.
Niche.
That might be the Ohioan in me, though.
I always said niche, but I've been hearing niche recently. So anyway, I decided to narrow it down. But I thought Lexington, Fayette County might be a little too narrow. How about Bluegrass region? And that makes it technically Fayette County and the surrounding 14 counties, which is the inner Bluegrass region. However, if I want to interview somebody in Louisville, which I do, or in Owensboro or Paducah, which who knows I might, then that's still the Bluegrass state. Yeah. So it's not crazy, right? So
it's giving you a realm, but you're not afraid to get out of there.
That's right.
And I feel that.
Yeah, but I won't be interviewing, people in Dayton, Ohio, unless, and I could say unless whatever that person's topic was very, very, very interesting to people in the Bluegrass, had something to do with Kentucky.
Now, and I know you mentioned that your passion is talking to people one-on-one in person, but the good bulk of the show started during the pandemic, which made it a little bit harder to do that. So how did you kind of adapt to that's part, while also try to maintain that kind of relational aspect that you have for your show?
That's exactly right. So my first 3 shows were in person. So February 8th, February 22nd, and March 7th. Those were my first 3 shows. And then, bam, COVID hit. We got shut down. So I didn't do anything in April, May, or June. And I had to figure out, we were all kind of in shock, I think.
Yeah.
So I finally figured, all right, I'm gonna do this virtually, I guess it's called, over the internet. But how am I going to do it? Because I want the very best sound quality that I can get. And there are a number of techniques, programs that you can use to do that. And I studied each of them. There's Squadcast, Clean Feed, Zencaster, and Riverside. I knew I did not want to use Skype or Zoom. I had used Skype in the past, using a mix minus setup with a mixing board and all this stuff. But Skype can, I at that time, now I don't know what it's like today, but it can, in fact, there was a term for it. People would say it sounds kind of Skypey. I mean, there would be this kind of a different sound to it that I just didn't like. Frankly, in my opinion, Zoom is not as iffy as Skype, but the audio file is still very compressed. And it's great for doing video conferencing, doesn't bother you when you're video conferencing. But if you're a real audio snob, that sounds not right in your ear. So I've only done one show by Skype, by Zoom is what I meant to be saying. And that was one with a group of people who were very accustomed to Zoom. They were having Zoom meetings every week. So it's like, all right, we're going to just stick with that because they're comfortable with it. But I chose Squadcast.
Yeah.
And that's what my shows were, I skipped April, May, and June, went to Squadcast and did, I did 3 or 4 shows with that. And then starting back the end of May 31st, I started back in person, and I've done 4 in person now.
Things are still kind of up in the air as far as the pandemic goes, but I mean, it does make a difference because. So I was recording over Zoom. I know you've listened to a few of my shows. I'm sorry if the audio quality wasn't the best. We're balling on a budget, but
yeah.
But you know, it makes such a difference. I remember like it right here in the room we're sitting in. I talked with the guys of Table Knots who do a YouTube channel, and it was so different doing it in person than what I was used to over the last year of just doing it online. That and it comes across in the shows too. I think like you can definitely tell the difference between a Zoom call interview and a in-person interview as well.
Yeah, the energy is just different.
Yeah,
for sure. Because what I like is for my listeners to be able to feel like they're just sort of sitting in the same room with you, that eavesdropping on your conversation, and that vibe between the host and the guest when it's online. For those of us who aren't trained to do that, just isn't the same. Now, there are people that can pull that off, like Terry Gross with Fresh Air. I mean, some of those professional people that do it for a living, and have a team and all of that, and have been doing it for decades, they get where they can make you feel like you're in the room with them. But most of us can't do that.
I wanted to know, how did you know how did you figure out how to make a podcast? Because like for me, when I started in 2018, it was pretty easy. I Googled and found the equipment. I found a networking group like what we're a part of now, and those were kind of the bases that helped me to start the show. But in 2007, I'm assuming a Google search didn't give you too many options on how to make a podcast.
No, that's it. It was those 5 books.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I say, I still have them. It'd be interesting to go back and look at those books and see how much of what's in there is still applicable today. Probably most of it. And at that time, when podcasting first started, I mean, you had to really be a technical person to do a podcast, because I don't know what the right word is, you had to code or whatever your own RSS feed. You couldn't just upload it to Libsyn like I do now. So it was all just really new, and that's the reading those 5 books.
And then when you would talk to people about the show, like now, when someone says, I have a podcast, here's how you find it. You can put a link on social media. You can pull out their phone and find their app for them. But, I mean, were there even iPhones in 2007?
Oh, no, not at all. So the way that you listen to a podcast, that's it. I had forgotten. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. So you had a little iPod, the little. I mean, it was high. This was high tech stuff. This little iPod that was like the size of 2.5 matchbooks or something like that.
I had the shuffle. I had the little tiny shuffle.
Yeah, that's what I had. Yeah, that wasn't the first one I had, but finally I got that one. And then you would plug that into your computer. You would open iTunes. You would select the podcast that you had subscribed to on iTunes, and then tell iTunes to download that, and walk away, because it's going to take an hour and a half or 2 hours for this thing. And I mean, one of the things that I would read is that people would be filling up their iPod with a lot of content to listen to, and they would have that being done overnight while they were sleeping. Just let it keep downloading all night.
Yeah.
So different. And then, as you said, people didn't know what podcasts were, and we didn't have Facebook or Twitter or anything like that to put it on. So you just had to tell people.
This is how you do it.
Yeah. And which was maybe one of the reasons that a lot of people would, what they call pod fade away. And maybe the reason I did too, because after a while it's like, back then, I mean, it's like, why am I doing this kind of thing? But there is another reason to do it besides people listening to it. So,
well, and it seems like especially like what you're saying, like with podcasting, especially the early podcasters like yourself, they were almost ahead of their time, because now that the technology's caught up and we have Spotify, YouTube, and we have even more than one source to listen to podcasts, it makes it a lot easier now to produce it in a way.
So it's so much easier today. And I use Libsyn as my hosting company, and they're in the beta stage right now of Libsyn 5.0, and I'm still using 4 because I understand how it works. But 5.0 is supposed to be really cool. But yeah, it just takes. Oh, and today you can watch as you said, you can watch all these tutorials.
Yeah.
And they can show you how it's done. And on Libsyn, there are tons of tutorials where you can just go in there and they'll teach you how to do it. Free.
That's when I was starting my show. I mean, that's exactly what I committed to, like about a month of just research, and I watched videos from Libsyn.
Yeah.
Now I don't host on Libsyn, but they gave me a lot of good content. I figured out which equipment to buy from just watching YouTube reviews, and that's kind of how it all started, is by learning from those who did it before. We're excited though that you've gotten your show started back up here. It's awesome to hear, and you've had a lot of interesting variety of guests on. You've talked about how you're interested in arts, and you've had authors, and you've had motivational speakers, and people with inspiring stories on the show. So let me ask you, because I know my process for getting guests on, but how do you come across your guests, and who do you look at and say, man, I want to have them on the show?
Sure. Well, I'll give you just a little bit more background about why I'm doing it, and that'll help me explain the guests that I have. So again, I'm retired at age 70 in 2019, and I needed a hobby. I do want to put out there that I'm not monetizing this. If anyone's looking to me for inspiration about how to make podcasting turn into their livelihood, I'm not the person for that. I'm the hobby guy.
Amen. You same here.
So
go to Mark Rucker for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And he's knocking it out of the park with that. But I just needed a hobby, and I didn't want to have a hobby that would take me away from home for long periods of time. I've been away from home so much in my career that now I want to be home. So I don't want to be out on a fishing trip. I don't want to be out on a golf course or those types of things. So, I want to stay out of my recliner. And this is kind of a key phrase. I want to have fun with friends. So the way that I started out, and talking about conversation, and I would encourage all of your listeners to buy a book by Evan Carmichael called Your One Word. In that book, he takes you through a process where you come up with like what one word is that sort of represents what your interests are, what you're passionate about, where you should be spending your time, your energy, and your money. So my one word, it became very clear, was conversation. So that really supports what I'm doing with the podcast. So I started out wanting to have fun with friends, and so far all of my guests are people that I've known for a number of years that I've met through activities that I've been involved with, such as Toastmasters International, the National Speakers Association, Kentucky chapter, and other professional organizations or just organizations. So and now I've joined the BTMA, the Bluegrass Tourism Marketing Association, so that I'm meeting people that I can interview about tourism, about things around the bluegrass. I was at a meeting last night. I walked away with Dan with a stack of cards where there are at least 6 people that I met last night that I would like to have on my podcast. And by the way, I should say I do one episode a month. The reason I do one episode a month, not one a week, not 2 a month, is that it is a hobby. I don't want to feel ever in my life again a sense of overwhelm, like you get when you're working. Yeah. When you're what, 30?
Yes.
30?
Yeah,
so
30. You
probably know that from time to time I don't have to feel that anymore, at this stage of my life. So by doing one podcast a month, I have plenty of time to do everything. I try to record the podcast the middle of the month, like I'm recording one next Tuesday, and that's the middle of what month are we in? September?
Yes.
And it will be posted. I post my podcast the last day of the month. So I'll have almost 14 days to do the editing, write the show notes, do everything. So that's a nice relaxed pace.
Yeah.
So to get to back to your question of how I find my guests, it's just through me. I don't even like the word networking. That sounds a little too business oriented. I'm just getting out and meeting people, just having fun, but always with it in mind. I know everyone has a story, but does this person have a story? And this is important. Does this person have a story that I'm interested in? Because let me you haven't asked me this, but let me tell you who my audience is. My audience is me. Again, I'm not trying to monetize this. I'm trying to enjoy conversation with people. So number one for me is, do I think this person has a story that is going to be interesting and compelling to me? If it is to me, then it's going to be to somebody else. Maybe it's not to thousands of people like Tim Ferriss's guests, those types of things. But if it's interesting to me, if the person I'm interviewing enjoys it, then one thing that's for sure is that person, my guest, is going to have some family and friends that are going to want to listen to it.
Yeah.
And so if I've enjoyed, and by the way, my wife is my best audience member. She listens to all my episodes and so on. So
mine's listening to half. So,
great.
The one she's in.
My wife enjoys listening while she's walking on the track at LA Fitness, or awesome. A sport as they call it now. So again, it's a conversation that if it's interesting to me, so I'm like last night as I was meeting people, I was quickly making a determination. Do I see right now quickly, do I see where they might be? I'm sure all of them could be, but some of them just jump out at you. Like I've got to know more about this person. So that's how I find my guests. That's how I found them in the past, people I know. But what I'm looking forward to going down the road is interviewing people that I don't know, sitting across the table from someone who I've only recently met. And I'm doing that next Tuesday. Awesome. So that'll be with someone that we've met, and that's it. So,
is there anything from your guests that you've learned from all these episodes you've done? Has there been anything that's just kind of stood out to you from any of the guests you've had?
Sure. They're sort of general principles. First, I want to tell you about some of my favorite guests.
Oh yeah, please.
Actually, the first. I don't mean my favorite like the others aren't valuable to me as well, but the first three that I did were with friends that I see on a regular basis or have been in close contact with, and I did those in person with them. I'd forgotten to mention that I was a member at one time of the Kentucky Storytellers Association. So my first interview for Bluegrass Region Voices and Views, which was posted on February 8th, 2020, was with a guy named Jerry Young. Jerry's about 82 now. He and I have been friends since 1979. When Jerry was 27, he was in an automobile accident and didn't just lose his sight, he lost his eyes.
Oh, wow.
Completely. He is completely blind, has been from age 27 up until he's 10 years old now to 82.
Wow.
So my first podcast we did we used the back room at Joseph Beth Bookstore. I picked him up, took him there. We did the as I didn't have a studio in my home at that time as I do now. And I like getting out. So we went to that back room, sat there and just had a wonderful conversation, and then had dinner. We had dinner first, and then the podcast recording session. And one of the things that I learned have learned from him over the years, and it really comes out in the video, is just resilience and how we can have just an awful thing happen to us and yet bounce back from that. And that theme was repeated in the podcast that I posted just this past July 31st. It was with a friend of mine, Paul Irway, who's a member of the National Speakers Association. And Paul, I think Paul's 64 now. When he was a senior in college, graduating, went out for a graduation party with a friend of his. Paul knew he was going to be drinking, so he and his girlfriend sat in the back of the car. His friend did not drink. He was the designated driver. Yet, in the middle of the night, they came up on a crossroads, and there had been construction going on, a lot of gravel. Anyway, the car skid and went down the embankment, and Paul was paralyzed from the chest down as a senior in high school.
Oh, my God.
And his goal had been to work in the horse industry. That was what, I didn't know, that's what he actually studied in college, was things about the horse, equine science or whatever. And so, of course, he had to pivot. And then 23 years later, he was out in his racing wheelchair training to do a marathon in Japan and ran into a truck. Wow. And was severely injured again. That was 8 years ago. And now he's still training in a training. He's intending. So then what we did the podcast about was, so he, I think it was 5 years ago, he and two other guys did 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 weeks.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, each one of them didn't do all 50. I think Paul did like 38 of those. When he wasn't actually able to go, he was working on the logistics and all that so as a team, they complete. So anyway, again, resilience. And I that's probably what I've learned from my guests as a common theme, is that each of them has a unique story, something unique to offer, but overall we need to be resilient. We need to keep learning. We need to keep moving. And then, of course, conversation matters, sharing our life story with other people, and that maybe all of us could write a book.
That'd be awesome. Probably one of my favorite episodes that I just listened to was actually from December, was your episode with the organizers of Toastmasters.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
I know you're part of Toastmasters, right?
I'm not active I'm not presently in Toastmasters.
Oh, you're not?
Not at this. I first joined in 1979.
Oh, wow.
And this Jerry Young, the fellow I was telling you about, the blind fellow, he was my mentor back then. He was in the club when I first joined. That's how we met. But yeah, Toastmasters changed my life for the better. I mean, without Toastmasters, I would not have had the success in the career that I had by any stretch of the imagination.
Could you, and I know you're not actively promoting the brand, but could you tell my listeners a little bit of a nutshell what Toastmasters is?
Sure. Well, it's to help teach people and give them experience in communications and leadership, both communications and leadership. Most of us, though, get in Toastmasters for the communications part, and the specific reason is to get over stage fright. That is the common thread that runs, from my experience, being a member of 5 clubs over the years since 1979. Most people are getting in, whether they'll admit it right off the bat or not, is because they want to increase their confidence. And then they become aware that, well, to increase their confidence, they're going to have to increase their skills. But it's the lack of confidence. It's what I had when I was 28 years old, was debilitating, career-ending stage fright. And I was in a role where I was being asked to, I was asked to get up and introduce the speaker at a conference. I told my boss, I said, Mr. Pike, I said, I can't. I thought about it overnight, by the way. I didn't tell him right away. I was sleepless. The next day I told him that, now listen, all I was asked to do was introduce the speaker, not speak. It might have taken 90 seconds to 2 minutes, but I really wasn't thinking clearly. But I told him I couldn't do it. I'd have to quit my job.
Oh.
So he said, okay. But not okay, not quit your job, but okay, he would introduce the speaker, but I needed to work on my problem. So then there's a whole story about how I found out about Toastmasters and all, but I ended up joining a Toastmasters club, and within a year and a half, it had changed my life. I moved to Pittsburgh. I had a group of people, 12 people working for me. I was doing presentation in a year and a half. Wow. That's how quickly it can work if you work the program. But then been a member of 5 clubs over the years. So you learn public speaking, communication skills, and then eventually you'll get involved in learning leadership skills too by taking on leadership roles in the club, at the area level, the district level, and so on.
Well, I mean, it sounds like an awesome club. I know when I talk to a lot of people, public speaking is one of their biggest fears. Not for me. My wife tells me I have a keen for theatrics. So,
well, one of the strongest clubs in this area, you live in Versailles, and one of the strongest, most fun clubs in Central Kentucky is Midway Toastmasters, and they meet
at Midway
at the university.
Oh, awesome.
Because they've been doing it online since last year, but they're back doing in-person and virtual now. And I'd encourage you to get over there and check that out.
Yeah, I definitely want to. So awesome. Tom, as we start kind of winding down here, I got a few more questions I want to ask you. One big thing I want to ask you is since you've kind of been through the journey of podcasting from the start. You're the godfather of podcasting. I don't care what you say, but what advice would you give to people wanting to get into podcasting now?
Well, I'd say the first thing to do is decide why you want to do it. Just think about that, maybe write that down. Why do you want to do it? Because you might be wanting to come back and read that. But then, and so what I'll give you are the first steps. If I were tutoring someone and they knew why they wanted to do it and they were going to do it, all right, then give a lot of thought to the name of your podcast. Give a lot of thought to that. That's number one. Don't rush in to naming it. Get a legal pad. Spend a week or two. Writing down various names, thinking about them, crossing things out, and Google that name that you come up with. First of all, you want to make sure that the name you've chosen isn't associated in some way with something you don't want to be associated with.
Yeah. And
that can happen. The other thing is you want to make sure that you can get the website address for that name. Exactly for that name. So the name's important. Then the next thing is you've got to have a logo made that expresses your brand. And unless you have some skills in design, I would say spend a little money. It might cost $150, but have a graphic artist come up with that logo for you. And there are certain dimensions it has to be and so on for Apple Podcasts to accept it. So you've got your name, you've got a website, you've got a logo, and then spend the money that you need to spend on equipment. You've done really well here with these ATR 2100 mics. You use the same mics that I've got. These are dynamic mics that are just perfect as far as I'm concerned. Then you've got to choose. Then you've got to record you into something. So I use a Zoom H6 that I can plug 4 mics into. You've got a great setup. You're plugging
my Tascam,
into your Tascam, into your computer. So you've got to figure that out. Then you have to have some editing software, which in the industry it's called your DAW, DAW, digital audio workstation. So you've got to select that. And then you've got to have a hosting company. You've got to have a place where your audio files reside that then turns them into RSS feeds that then people's apps download. So those are give a lot of thought to each of those, and then you're really off and running. Then as far as kind of general philosophical things, avoid overwhelm. Just take small steps, begin small, but be consistent with what you do. If you find yourself, as you did at one point, as I think you said, where it's just like, all right, it's taken away from my time with my fiance. Don't let that happen. I mean, once you realize that's happening, pivot, just downsize it. Just don't quit. Just keep on moving ahead. And then I would recommend to anybody that's in podcasting, there's a podcast you have to listen to, and that's called The Feed by Libsyn. You don't have to be using Libsyn to benefit from that. You can be putting your files any place. But if you want to keep up with what's going on in the world of podcasting, I think the show comes out every 2 weeks. It's not too much. The shows are kind of long, an hour and a half or so, but every one of those will teach you something that you will be so glad that you knew about what's going on in the world of podcasting. So that's kind of some basic advice.
Well, I want to, this next question I want to ask you is kind of taking a page out of your book, because you ask, I think a very enlightening question at the end of your episode, as I wanted to ask you too, is there anything you wanted to talk about that I failed to ask you about today?
Well, what I always ask my guest is...
Sorry if I butchered the way I said it.
Oh, no, you did. No, you did it just perfectly. That's the way I say it. And one of the things that I would like to talk about just for a moment are some of the things that I really like about the Bluegrass region.
Oh, yeah. So we can catty corner that off to the next question you always ask is, what's your favorite parts of the Bluegrass? And the way you've always kind of phrase it is, if you have guests from out of town, where are you taking them?
Right. Okay. So you're asking both of those. All right. So, yeah.
Tag team it.
Good point. Sure. So the first thing I just would say again that make sure that when you're starting, if you're going to start any kind of a project, avoid overwhelm and use small steps. I think that's my general theme. And then as far as what I like around the Bluegrass, first of all, I like to avoid crowds. So I would be the wrong person to have on your podcast when you're talking about sports. I don't like going to arenas. I don't even like. Now tomorrow night I'm going to be at the Opera House seeing Pink Floyd, but the Pink Floyd tribute. And that'll be as big a crowd as I want to be in this year.
But we won't be seeing the grandstands of Keeneland or anything like that.
Probably not.
Okay.
Now, Keeneland might be okay, but big event. So I like to avoid crowds. So that means that I like things like the Arboretum. I like so these are things that if I had a guest coming in from out of town and I wanted to show them the beauty of this area, but I didn't want to drive down to the gorge or something like that, just something right around town here, I would show them the Arboretum over off Alumni Drive. I'd take them out to the Raven Run Nature Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Beautiful place. And then right in my neighborhood, I live in Gardenside, Beaumont Trail. What a treasure that is we have there. And then if I were going to take them out to eat, if I wanted to go to kind of a upscale type of place that's local, I like Malone's, and I like the Hamburg location. And then I enjoy places that have been around a long time. Excuse me, like Winchell's on Southland Drive and Lexington Diner, which used to be downtown Lexington, but is 0.7 of a mile from my house now on Lane Allen Road. And then Critchfield's has moved to Southland Drive, and you've got to go to Critchfield's and get their fried chicken.
Absolutely.
Or a cheeseburger.
Yeah, I've gotten their fried chicken a few times. Working near Southland Drive, it's worth it every cent.
Yeah. So those are just some kind of, my favorite things in Kentucky are kind of, we're down home people. We like down home cooking. We love to talk and we love to eat. So those are just some places that you could take somebody.
Hey, I love them all. Those are definitely some of my favorites too. I think one of the hidden gems around here that a lot of people don't talk about is McConnell Springs.
I should have mentioned that. Yes.
A lot of people. I take people to McConnell Springs, and no one ever really knows about it till they get out there, and they are shocked how beautiful it is out there. And
the location. It's right in the middle of an industrial park.
Yeah, exactly.
You would never know that when you're there.
It's so conspicuous. You got an abandoned distillery down the street, and you got construction and a police station. It's just hidden, and then Dad's and Blue Door are to just some of the best food I ever had, and we're a little spoiled here in Lexington as far as food goes. We're not worthy.
Taco Tuesday at Dad's.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on here. I want to ask you this final question. Where are you hoping to take the show from here? I know you said you're trying to branch off and meet with guests that you've only maybe have one or two passing conversation with or don't know that well at all what you're getting ready to do. But what's the hope for the show as you kind of grow the hobby?
Sure. Well, to maintain consistency, to do one podcast a month, one video promotion 2 weeks later, one around the Bluegrass video a month. So 3 pieces of content per month for the next year. And that's as far ahead, really, as I'm looking. As I said, I don't have 5-year plans anymore. I kind of have these 3-month experiments that then will tell me whether or not to make that a 1-year project. So that's what I'm doing. And the ultimate goal, and I wasn't really kidding, is when I'm 90 or 92, I would love to think that I'm in a assisted living facility. If I can't be at home at that, maybe I'll still be at home. But interviewing, it'd be kind of cool to be in an assisted living facility and have all these people there that could be right on the podcast, So it's just so the overall thing is to keep having conversations that I enjoy.
Awesome. Well, Tom, if people want to keep up with the conversations you're having, where can they find Bluegrass Region Voices and Views? Sure.
Well, my podcast website is bluegrassregionvoicesandviews.com. So all my content is on there. Then I have a YouTube channel, which is Bluegrass Region Voices and Views, but I put those YouTube clips on the website. Then my podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. So, if you have an iPhone, it's on the native app on there, the one that comes on the phone, Apple Podcast. It's on Spotify, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Castbox, and on and on and on. So
you name it, you'll find it.
It should be there. So all you do, if someone is not sure, you have that app on your phone, which you get from your app store, and Apple Podcast app's already on your phone. Go in there and just type in or key in Bluegrass Region Voices and Views, and it'll show up. And then, they're not saying subscribe anymore. They're saying follow. It's changing in our podcast world. So just click the button to follow, or maybe it says subscribe. It's free.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tom, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some of your thoughts. I hope everyone gets a chance to listen to your show, and hopefully you won't be a stranger, be a friend of my corner, and we'll hopefully have you back on the show again soon.
I appreciate it, and appreciate the inspiration that you are to me each time I listen to your show. Thank you.
Thank you.